think it's ironic that we control the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the White House, and we're yelling election fraud. I mean, we won all the damn elections, and we're in charge, and what are we doing with it? We're bankrupting the country, we're starting new wars, we're violating the Constitution, we're not cracking down on the fraud. The problem is not the elections. We won the damn elections. The problem is we're wasting our opportunity that the voters gave us.
Hi again, everybody. It is remarkable. Stop the Press's news when the truth comes spilling out the mouth of a Republican. It's 5 o'clock in the East, and it's sad that that's news, but it takes a Republican who lost his primary to a Trump-backed candidate to utter the truth. The Republicans won everything. They control all 3 branches of government. And he's right. The elections aren't the problem. Unfortunately, they're a different problem, right? Trump's war against voter fraud and mail-in voting makes no sense politically or structurally. But that's for a reason. That's by design. And that's because the fight was never about fraud, which there are so few instances of actual fraud. We have ways to deal with them. It's a crime if you cheat. But it's about the perception that the election results can't be trusted because it's about what's going to happen in the future. It's not about the elections they won in the past. It's about stoking fear and making voters afraid that future elections could be hijacked. So they'll hand over authority to adjudicate the outcome to Donald Trump and the executive branch of government. It's what he tried to do with an executive order targeting mail-in voting. It was dealt a major legal blow. We covered that on this program yesterday. We told you about the federal judge who ruled that the Trump administration has no business interfering in how elections are administered, that is solely the job of the states. The Constitution says so. The judge's ruling declared sections of Trump's order now legally void. This week, we also saw the flat-out admission by Donald Trump that he asked DOJ to look into California's primaries. Listen to that.
I called up the very powerful, very good U.S. attorney in California, and I said, do me a favor, take a look. They're trying to steal that election, too.
So of that confession, Democracy Docket says this, quote, it's the clearest evidence yet of Trump's weaponization of the department to interfere in our elections. It's a flashing red warning sign to all Americans about what Trump is planning, what he is actively putting in place to do in November. The ongoing fight to protect our democracy is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Voting rights attorney, founder of Democracy Docket at the end of a big week in his world, Mark Elias is back with us. Also back with us, former assistant special agent in charge at the FBI and national security and intelligence analyst Michael Feinberg is back with us. So, Mark Elias, you're always very generous in giving us credit for covering these stories, but I think that it's clear we failed to put them all together, right? So I think this week, Pulte settled in at ODNI. Judge after judge knocked down as unconstitutional and illegal Trump's attempts to use the Postal Service and take states' voter rolls, problems we've identified as overreach, but decisions we covered as sort of judicial developments. And you've got Massey and others saying what used to be sort of described as the quiet part out loud. Elections are the problems. Republicans ran the tables. They won all the elections. If they're fraudulent, they were fraudulent and rigged in their favor. Focusing anyone who's paying attention on Trump's very, very astute read of the polls, which is that he's heading for an electoral wipeout. What are they doing?
So this is what's so dangerous about it, Nicole, is that he's not trying to become more popular, right? He actually announced that he was going to veto a bipartisan housing bill while the Republicans were holding a press conference announcing their passage of a bipartisan housing bill, right? Like, the thing that is flashing such a red light for me right now is not that Donald Trump is lying about elections. It is not that his Department of Justice is suing in court. They are losing like crazy. They are now 0-9 in efforts to get the voter files. They lost their first case. We won our first case before a court of appeals at the Sixth Circuit on that, right? It's not their litigation. What has me most concerned, and the reason why I think we all need to be connecting the pieces, as you say, is because Donald Trump isn't acting like a politician who thinks any of the popularity measures of the presidency matter. He's not acting like someone who's trying to make the Republican candidate's job of running in free and fair elections easier. You know, we've all had instances in the past in which one party accuses the other of, in an election year, doing popular things, releasing oil from the Strategic National Reserve or cutting taxes. Donald Trump's not doing any of that. What he's doing is saying, we're going to win this election by falsely claiming fraud and perhaps seizing ballots, perhaps just taking over certification, perhaps who knows what, but it is not because he's going to try to run candidates to win fair and square.
So what do we do? I mean, I don't disagree with you. I struggle with it because I think he's still capable of a pivot. I think he's so insulated from reality. This new book has this aide that prints love letters. I don't know if she writes them or finds them on the internet. Like, he really is deluded by design. But I feel like it's not beyond him to cut $1,000 check for every, registered MAGA voter. I mean, but I'll take your theory. How do we protect against what he's going to do in the absence of acting like a political actor?
Yeah, so it's a multi-pronged strategy, right? I mean, the first is we do need to educate the public. And so I do think that the work that you do on this program, it's why I come on at every opportunity, is vitally important, because it is informing people about what's happening in advance so that when they see it, they recognize it early and can debunk it. The second is, obviously, as a lawyer, we had a great week in court and we are continuing to litigate. My law firm and we are in 83 cases in 41 states. We won the Sixth Circuit case today. This week. We won the Maryland case this week, and we saw victories other places. And next week, we're waiting on the Supreme Court to rule in a couple of important cases. So the courts have a role to play here. But finally, individual voters, the most important thing you can do is make it not close elections, like register to vote, have a plan to vote, volunteer for a campaign, volunteer for an organization that does voter turnout, like get engaged in the electoral process, because ultimately Donald Trump has a easier chance to try to steal elections if they're close than if they're not close. So that is what we do.
Michael Feinberg, the overlay of the national security agencies is one of the more opaque parts of whatever they're doing until he thrusts Bill Pulte into this job as ODNI. What are your sort of theories or questions or concerns about where the friction is between this blatantly, flagrantly, openly political actor now atop ODNI?
If we went through all my concerns, we'd be here longer than a marathon viewing of every Lord of the Rings film. So I'm going to just highlight the main one I have, which is I agree with everything that Mark just said. And I hope that not just in the run up to the midterms, but on the election night itself, we have armies of lawyers ready to file for injunctive relief, because I have zero doubt that this Justice Department and this administration is going to do everything they can to throw sands in the gears of the electoral process. The problem that we still cannot fight against, even with that assistance, is that there is very little recourse for people to push back on national security information. And what I mean by that is Bill Pulte could very well take an actual bona fide intelligence report and declassify just enough of it to make it look like something suspicious has happened, but not declassify the parts that explain why we don't actually need to worry. And if he does that, anyone who attempts to correct the record by telling the public about what is actually going on is going to be violating laws against mishandling classified information. The minute Bill Pulte walked into that office, the needle signifying danger went through the black into the red and off the dial. Congress needs to get its act together. I don't have much faith that they will, and make sure that long before the midterms occur, Bill Pulte is nowhere near that office. And I should add, Jay Clayton getting there, given that he has made completely unfounded assertions about the California primaries, which is not even anywhere remotely near his jurisdiction, doesn't really fill me with confidence that he'll be an honest broker either. So, to the extent there are Republicans like Massey who have found their conscience and their backbone now that they don't have to worry about a primary, now is the time to speak up. A lot of them were courageous in the hours after January 6th. That courage evaporated as winter turned to spring. We can't afford to have that sort of milquetoast patriotism that only exhibits itself when convenient. We need people to stand for principles.
Michael, let me just ask you to explain what you mean about what Bill Pulte could do. I mean, after Russia attacked our elections in 2016, the Obama administration came out and talked about it. They released, I think, through the Department of Homeland Security information, but they also released information saying that they knew, they had investigated, and they hadn't gotten into any voting machines. They hadn't changed the outcome of any elections. Is that the kind of sort of contextualized intel? And your concern is that half of that gets released without the other half, or what is? Just give us an example based on history or something hypothetical.
So I could actually give you a hypothetical one and a real one. The hypothetical one would be Bill Pulte and ODNI release information about a massive investigation they've overseen into the integrity of voting machines and foreign influence on U.S. elections. And that they are doing this because there is a very real concern that people who should not be voting or making political contributions are doing so. That could be the introduction to an intelligence product. And Bill Pulte could declassify that introduction and release it to the public. And if there are 45 pages of analysis disproving the theory that follow that introduction that he chooses not to declassify, all that the public knows is that the intelligence community saw a huge risk of illegal votes and foreign influence. An actual example would be, the Republicans since Trump's election released a document that argued the Russians were somehow conspiring with the Clintons to make it look like Donald Trump was working for them. And that was the genesis of the Crossfire Hurricane, Mueller Special Counsel Office, various investigations that so bedeviled Trump in his first term. Now, John Durham saw that same document and in his report concluded that it was a fake. It was something the Russians did to undermine public belief in Crossfire Hurricane and in Mueller's probe. But when the Republicans re-released it, they didn't include that disclaimer. So they just put documents out into the wild, completely free of context, in order to make people believe what is diametrically opposed to the truth. And it is very difficult to push back against that.
Mark Elias, what are your concerns? I mean, they haven't won a case, you and your firm, without the assistance or infrastructure of big law, something we've talked about a lot here over the last 2 years, have batted 1,000. What are your concerns, if any, about what the Supreme Court will see in this, I think it's a mail-in ballot case, right, that made its way to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court's got 8 cases left to decide this term. And there's obviously several that have captured the national attention, the birthright citizenship case, a couple of cases involving his ability to fire people, one at the FTC, one at the Fed. But the biggest case that I think is left on the docket is a case out of Mississippi. It is Watson versus RNC. And in this case, the Republican National Committee is trying to say that states may not count ballots if they are postmarked by Election Day but are received a couple of days afterwards. So the idea is if a voter votes, a week or 10 days in advance of the election, and the absentee ballot gets postmarked and it arrives, but it doesn't get to the election office till the Wednesday rather than on the Tuesday of election, the RNC says that ballot has to be thrown in the garbage. And just to give people a sense of the scale here, we're not talking about a few hundred ballots or thousands of ballots or tens of thousands of ballots. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of ballots every election wind up in this category. And the Republican National Committee has brought this case because they believe it benefits them politically, like literally in the math, because you can see whose ballot comes in when on a voter file. And the RNC has come to the conclusion that Democrats tend to vote more by mail, and young voters who tend to vote Democratic tend to vote later. So these ballots are disproportionately Democratic. So this case is before the Supreme Court. My law firm and I, we intervened at the trial court to defend this case, and as well as in the Supreme Court. So we're waiting on a decision. And if we win, then, it's business as usual. If we lose, then we are going to see this effort to not just disenfranchise these voters, but mark my words, they will go after early voting next. They will go after ballots that are counted after the election because they've been cured. I mean, the Republican Party is going to attack every aspect of voting with absolute impunity if they win here. So we're waiting on that decision. Next round comes out on Monday morning, and I will be sitting by the computer waiting.
It's amazing, though, and I'm dating myself, but Republicans used to be the big vote by mail people. I mean, do Republicans not vote by mail anymore?
So here's the deal. You are exactly right. I always remind people that in 2010, Colorado instituted voting by mail. And what happened? A Democratic senator lost his election to Cory Gardner, a Republican senator. You look at the history of elections in Florida, where you used to have Democratic senators and Democratic governors. What happened? Republicans invested in voting by mail, and they flipped that state on vote by mail. You look at Arizona, right? How did Republicans gain such a dominance in Arizona? Because Arizona moved to more voting by mail. So historically, you're exactly right that voting by mail had very little partisan pull, but Republicans actually invested more in those programs. And so that was a place in which their superior spending and organization mattered. Donald Trump came along, though, in 2020 and just out of the blue decided we don't like voting by mail anymore. And a bunch of lemmings and sycophants were like, okay, I guess we don't like voting by mail anymore. And they've been attacking it ever since. So now it is more Democrats vote by mail and Republicans vote more in person on Election Day.
It's crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. All right, I need both of you to stick around a little bit longer. When we come back, there are more alarm bells going off after federal agents came after an election worker at a polling place in upstate New York this week. We'll bring you that reporting next. Also ahead, apart from his gilded ballroom, his massive arch, his busted up reflecting pool, high on Donald Trump's list of obsessions these days is former President Barack Obama and all of his success. What Obama is saying about Trump's unnatural and unhealthy fixation on him. We'll bring you that later in the hour. And we're following some breaking news out of Iran. U.S. Central Command forces just conducted strikes. They're in response to Iran's attack yesterday on a commercial container ship in the Strait of Hormuz. In a social media post this afternoon, Donald Trump called Iran's attack a, quote, foolish violation of the already fragile ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. It's not clear how or whether the U.S. was going to respond. It wasn't, at least until now. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Some alarming reporting to tell you about today. The scene unfolded in Syracuse, New York this week. Federal agents confronted a poll worker on Election Day. Here's a video of that worker, Paige-Lynn Gagne. She posted it to Instagram. According to reporting from Syracuse.com, she was working Tuesday afternoon at the Central Library when agents called to meet with her. She said she invited them in. She said she did not want to meet them outside alone. She said this, quote, I've seen the news, especially in Minnesota, and I didn't want anything to happen to me at all. The reporting adds this, quote, the agents handed Gagne a form letter that says they are investigating threats made against ICE personnel. The form says the agents had identified an Instagram account that they believe breaks federal law. What Gagne assumes they're talking about was an Instagram post she posted back in January where she named the ICE officer who killed Renee Nicole Good. She cited the Minnesota Star Tribune reporting when she stated his name in her post. Gagne said this, quote, "For ICE to come to me over a social media post just feels very 1984 to me. They definitely should have known better to not go to a polling place, even if I said it was okay." We're back with Mark and Michael. Michael Feinberg, your thoughts?
What they did is patently illegal and punishable by up to 5 years in prison. In the aftermath of a long history in the Jim Crow South and in the Reconstruction era before it of armed personnel being used to dissuade minorities from voting, Congress passed 18 U.S.C. 592, which explicitly prohibits armed federal agents or military personnel from operating in a polling place unless they are repelling armed invaders of the United States. This is not a gray area in federal law. During my 16 years at the FBI, I was repeatedly admonished, even when I went to vote as a private citizen, ensure that nobody could see my badge, weapon, or identify me as federal law enforcement, because our presence in that capacity in a polling place was not just inappropriate according to the norms of democracy, but entirely illegal. The fact that ICE wouldn't think twice before doing something this egregious speaks volumes about their lack of professionalism, their lack of constitutional rigor, and I can only assume their lack of training. And the fact that they were doing it after Todd Blanche said in public that he thinks there's nothing wrong with armed agents being at the polls is yet one more reason every senator who takes seriously his or her oath to the Constitution should not be confirming him for Attorney General.
You know, there's such a lack of understanding of the laws about this. I mean, I cover this every day, and I don't know that I would have known how black and white this is. Mark Elias.
Yeah, look, I mean, what we have is an administration that acts with impunity that has now spread that impunity downstream. So the president breaks the law and doesn't have any consequences. Supreme Court says he's immune. Next thing you know it, we see the activities of ICE agents in Minneapolis, many of whom acting as if the law doesn't apply to them, and they act with impunity, figuring they're fine because the Department of Justice will never prosecute them. And so you have an attorney general nominee who acts with impunity. So is it any surprise that you have these ICE agents now at the polls? And let me add, Nicole, think about what it is they went to investigate her over. She posted on social media that she thinks that an agent in Minneapolis who was identified by the media should be indicted. It is a crime, they're saying, to say that I think someone should be indicted. I mean, you know, we got sort of desensitized around this, I think, a bit around Minnesota. And then we had the seashells nonsense. And everyone thought, well, maybe that's just because he hates James Comey. No, I actually think they think that, like, putting pictures of seashells or saying your opinion that you think someone should be indicted, if it's someone in Donald Trump's circle or in who he likes, should be a crime. And so to me, before you even get to where they showed up at, and I totally agree with what was said, but before you even show up, but what are federal agents doing going up to private citizens saying that they expressing opinions about who should be indicted or not is somehow appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, Michael Feinberg, I've been covering Donald Trump's assault on the rule of law since the transition after he won the first time, since his sort of horrible start with Jeff Sessions, who I was never a fan of, but the way that he seemed to want to put Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein and Comey under his wing until Comey was fired, and then McCabe. I mean, it's a story that's been going on so long that even people that have sort of been staring at the trees in the forest so long that the pine needles are indented on their face lose focus of the fact that the whole reason law enforcement the whole reason this citizen was on the radar of law enforcement was because she posted something that was in the newspaper. What does it say about how they're surveilling public citizens?
Nothing good, and it's obviously a cause for concern for everybody. And if you're a conservative who's not concerned by this, just try and imagine how you would have felt if the same thing happened under the Biden or Obama administrations. You know, I think all three of us are roughly the same generation. And when we were kids, there was a big scare about teenage drug use and a lot of, frankly, cheesy and probably ineffective commercials to dissuade people from trying marijuana. And in one of them, a father angrily confronts his son. He's found a dime bag or something in the kid's drawer and proceeds to lecture him and then says, "Where on earth did you learn this?" And, you know, in the shocking twist, the kid says, "I learned it from watching you, Dad." And that's basically what's happened with the Republican Party and federal law enforcement that has fallen under the sway of Trump. Is they've seen Trump repeatedly break the law, repeatedly get indicted in multiple jurisdictions at the federal and state level. And with the connivance of the Supreme Court and the timing of the election, escape from all of it scot-free. And the lesson they've internalized is that it's not so much whether you break a law that matters. It matters whether you could get away with it. The act itself isn't a moral transgression. The only thing you could fail at is escaping judgment. And that's a really dangerous lesson for anybody who carries a badge and gun and the implicit power of the state to have internalized.
Yeah. When you went to war on drugs, I went to the eggs, right? This is your brain. This is the brain. Isn't that the frying eggs?
Yep.
Those are seared in my brain. I still don't eat fried eggs. Mark Elias, Michael Feinberg. That was the lesson I got, right? And it wasn't about drugs. It was about eggs. That's for another day. Thank you both for starting us off. When we come back, maybe it's jealousy and a deeply unpopular president is completely obsessed on his highly popular, deeply respected predecessor from 2 times ago, what former President Barack Obama makes of Donald Trump's obsession with him still, or what it says about Donald Trump. That's next.